Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bronx River Sankofa, African American history along the Bronx River. I'm asked often, what is the Sankofa, and who are you and why are you doing this? So I'll answer all three questions. My name is Morgan Powell. I am a 37-year-old African American landscape designer who lives in the Bronx. I studied marketing and business management before I got involved with horticulture. I've been in the trade for about 10 years, but I've been in parks advocacy for much longer. I first got involved with parks in an active way shortly after high school. I graduated from Christopher Columbus High School in 1992. I shortly thereafter joined a program on which the National AmeriCorps program is based. It was called the City Volunteer Corps, which existed for many, many years through to the Giuliani administration when it got axed. And that program allowed young people, very often young people at risk, in the parlance of social scientists, and that is those of us who just did not know what we wanted to do with our lives once we got out of high school. So this program existed whereby young, mostly working class, lower middle class New Yorkers, mostly people of color, but some ethnic Caucasians as well, got involved, and we did 1 year of public service doing human service projects with senior citizens, people with various disorders, whether it was multiple sclerosis, handicapped individuals, also working with youth. And the other side of it was working in parks. And that was, as far as I know, parks under the management of New York City Parks and Recreation. So for 1 year, we fixed up parks, we raked, we weeded, we planted, we watered, we cleaned when we were in parks. And it really was an eye-opener because I had a fairly provincial childhood. I'm from a family that kind of raised me in a very risk-averse way, so that even though I lived by Bronx Park, which is one of the biggest parks in the Bronx, I really almost never went into the parks of Bronx Park outside of the Bronx Zoo and the New York Botanical Garden. So I didn't have a great understanding or personal history with parks in general outside of Central Park and Orchard Beach. So the experience of going to literally all 5 boroughs and working in parks in each of the 5 boroughs, seeing how extensive the system was and how beautiful so many of the parks were and having a great time, I was inspired and I stuck with it in a peripheral way. I certainly was more aware of parks thereafter because once you've cleaned up behind other people, you will never litter again. And that's one of the things that is fairly universal among people who get involved in various programs to improve parks. The one thing that stays with almost everyone is, I will never litter again in a park. And I certainly will never tolerate it by friends and family because once you've picked up behind other people, you realize it doesn't go away on its own. So that's part of the biography. More recently, when I transitioned from studying business management and marketing, first at New York Tech, and then at Bronx Community College, and finally at Marymount Manhattan College, and recognizing that I was very humanities-oriented. I really wasn't the managerial type per se, although I greatly appreciate having studied economics and accounting. Those things have served me well, and I certainly have a broader appreciation of the world once you see it through the perspective of what does stuff cost to maintain, to build. So that was clearly a blessing. However, I definitely didn't want to work for corporate America. I didn't want to get some middle-level management job and be behind a desk. And I had to figure out what was I going to do with my life because it just wasn't feeling right staying on that management track. So after having invested about 4 to 5 years of my life part-time as a student, I decided I really need to reconnect with my inherent gifts. What am I good at? What do I want to share with the world? And that's when I discovered horticulture. So I did a horticultural internship here at the New York Botanical Garden from 2001 to 2002. And I came out of the program with several letters of recommendation, having been reviewed very well by my supervisors. However, I just didn't have the confidence to go out into the large established landscape design and installation companies and apply for a job. So I opened up my phone book and I had quite a few contacts in publishing because just before I entered my horticultural internship, I had been the art director of the Harlem Book Fair. And so I met quite a few people who were in publishing, upper income people, many of whom owned their own homes. And quite a few of those people had recently purchased townhouses in Harlem. So they were a ready market for my services, and certainly I had great rapport with these people, and they became my first clients. So I worked for myself for about a year, and then when I saturated that market, I recognized that I had to find a job. And so I mostly gave up working for myself and found various jobs, eventually winding up as park manager of Stuyvesant Cove Park, which is the only plant, even today, planted exclusively with native plants. And it was a very early park to have a green building on it. In fact, it's the same architectural firm who designed that building who has designed the River House, which is projected to be the headquarters of the Bronx River Alliance when they finally get the money to install it at Starlight Park. So here I was finally hitting my stride and discovering what I was good at and doing something that I loved, doing the kind of thing that I would do for free if I could afford to, and just also recognizing that I was in a unique position because here I was, an African-American male who was beginning to move in parks advocacy circles and recognizing that the demographics of parks advocacy are completely inverse of who actually lives in New York City. So New York City is a city very much of immigrants from all over the world, whether they're from Eastern Europe, South America, Africa, the Caribbean, Asia. Large percentages of people of color from the South, second and third generation immigrants from the Caribbean, from elsewhere, and still a significant population of ethnic Caucasians from Italy, Eastern Europe, Ireland, etc. But we weren't mostly the people doing parks advocacy. And I thought, wow, this is like really an eye-opener. Like, how does this work? And within that awareness, I also recognized that quite a few parks groups were operating largely in communities of color and working class communities. And the materials and the programming were really coming out of the consciousness much more of the people who were running the programs and not so informed by the way that the people who actually were receiving the programming actually live their lives or think or talk. And that really stuck with me. And I thought, something has to be created to make this more culturally relevant. So I didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. This is still the early 2000s. And I didn't have a job in parks advocacy. It's something that I was doing kind of peripherally on weekends. And I more and more came to feel like I needed to make a contribution. So around 2003, the Bronx County Historical Society and the Department of African and African American Studies at Fordham University began to develop, for the first time ever, a repository of information about the history of African Americans in the Bronx. And it was largely catalyzed by a Korean War veteran named Archibald from the Morrisania community, who's passionately involved with a park in that community which is named after some Korean War veterans like himself. So the Bronx African American History Project was getting going, and they were doing oral histories and finding people who had lived in communities where there were large concentrations of African Americans. They were centered very largely in the Mott Haven community, and very notably Morrisania is where they got the most press. and to a lesser extent, Wakefield and Williamsbridge. So they were doing these oral histories and getting people on the page because the oral histories were transcribed in most cases. Some of them are available today online. Others, in more extended form, are printed and are in the archives of the Bronx County Historical Society and in the main library of Fordham University at Rose Hill. And I was really inspired by the project, which also includes a really exciting online component where those of us who are community researchers who work mostly as volunteers, when we like, contribute our research to this kind of online beehive. So we do our research and then we submit essays to this listserv, which goes to quite a lot of people inside and outside of New York City and internationally. And we keep each other updated on what we find, and it's very exciting. So I couldn't help noticing as the project moved along, 2005, 2006, people are talking about a very wide range of subjects from education and housing development and veterans affairs and various fraternal and mutual aid organizations like the Bronx NAACP and the Congress of Racial Equality back in the 60s, and the fact that quite a few buses left from the Central Bronx to attend the March on Washington in 1963, but no one ever talked about ecology. And I thought, I've got a unique contribution to make to this thing. Because I'm not the only one. There have been other African Americans who have made significant contributions to ecology here in New York City, and this is a topic that warrants attention as we work through our massive environmental crisis that the average person still hasn't really wrapped their brain around. So I sent out an email through the listserv and I said, does anybody know anything about African Americans along the Bronx River? This is back in 2005. And I got no responses. Absolutely nothing. It was like a pebble dropped in the middle of a lake and there wasn't even a ripple. So I thought, like, this is weird. Yeah. I don't believe no one's got a story. I probably just didn't ask the question the right way. Because quite a few African Americans, historically and up to the present day, fish along the Bronx River. Now, I don't know if people eat what they catch, but as a recreational exercise, people have been going out there with rods, formal and totally informal, and just fishing for carp and other things and catching crabs. But I wasn't getting those stories on the listserv. So I said, you know what? I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to find these stories. And I didn't even really have a clear vision of what I would do with these stories. I just felt like I needed to put this thing together, that African Americans along the Bronx River needed to be on the page somehow, even if it was, isolated in my apartment until I assembled enough to file it with all the oral histories. So I started where I had most recently been. It turns out that the founding orchid curator at the New York Botanical Garden is an African American named Keith Lloyd, and we're going to talk about him soon. So with that, let's start the actual tour. So the tour actually started